Next question is for Professor Chambliss, 3 minutes. Please give the audience an example of a worthy criticism of the capitalist system.
Of pure capitalism as Adam Smith envisioned it, or as capitalism has been distorted in this country?
It's your choice, your 3 minutes.
Okay. I don't have any criticisms of Adam Smith. He envisioned a perfect model of capitalism, which as soon as he wrote about it, it was impossible. That people would be allowed to pursue their self-interest and own property and what have you. Adam Smith talked about serving your fellow man so well that you would be rewarded with profits and salaries and wages and what have you. What we have in America today, I think, is best called crony capitalism. On this point, I think Professor Lindbeck and I would agree. And by crony capitalism, a lot of businesses have decided to line the halls of Washington, D.C. with lobbyists to get subsidies, bailouts, special tariffs, quotas, all of these things that we don't have any access to. And so they rob the taxpayers of their money to subsidize their businesses, even if their businesses are failing, and they call themselves capitalists. These people are not capitalists, I would call them corporate fascists. So if you want to look around and see where capitalism exists, it's the companies like Southwest Airlines that turned down the bailout money after September 11. It's Ford Motor Company that turned down the bailout money after the most recent recession. Where you see businesses simply saying to you, we offer this good or service. If you like it, give us your money. We will serve you well. We'll honor our warranties, and we will treat you well. And fortunately, if you think about every 100 transactions you're involved in, I would imagine well over 90 of them, you find yourself satisfied, the company didn't lie, cheat, steal, the clothes fit, the phone worked, the gas worked, your car moves down the road. Fortunately, most businesses have integrity. But it's the ones that are out there lying, cheating, and stealing from the taxpayers and not doing what they're supposed to that deserve our derision, and they're the ones giving Adam Smith's view of capitalism a bad name and other honest businesses a bad name as well. So my recommendation to you folks is if you're ever going to run a business, if you don't want the voters coming after your profit, be honest, be decent, treat people the way you would want to be treated, and the profits will roll in and you'll be rewarded for it.
Thank you, Professor Lindbeck, for your response.
Professor Chambliss is correct. I don't disagree with what he says about crony capitalism. That is the single biggest criticism of capitalism here as it is practiced in America, and largely as it is practiced around the world. If you are playing the system, gaming the system to your own benefit, practicing cronyism, then yes, that is a genuine corruption of the capitalist system as it was described by Adam Smith. I would just like to reference back to what Professor Chambliss said about Australia. That heritage ranking has only been gained in the last 2 years with the election of a Conservative government. That government is now so unpopular that if it was to hold an election tomorrow, it would lose.
Thank you. Question for Professor Lindbeck. Please give the audience an example of the positive aspects of the capitalist system.
The most outstanding feature of capitalism is the opportunity that it provides you to make something of yourself. It really does give you an opportunity, if capitalism is practiced correctly, to advance yourself. The problem is that when capitalism is corrupted, those chances are reduced. So if we want to take advantage of the best of capitalism, we need to make sure that capitalism functions correctly, that the opportunities to advance are available to everybody and available to everybody equally. And again, if so long as the opportunities are available equally, everyone should be able to advance equally as well, to their own ability. However, we don't see that. That's the one thing we don't see. It's one of the great benefits of capitalism, but it's the one thing that we consistently can argue against capitalism.
Professor Chambliss, why?
The dilemma that I face here is the consistent coming back to the idea that we just don't see these opportunities. Think of any other place in the world. Many of you are from countries where if you're born poor, you're going to die poor. If you're born with a wrong last name, with no family connections, you're going to die poor. Look at all of the stories in the United States of America of the people that, in effect, have looked in the mirror and figured out that you create your own opportunity. I recommend to everyone in this room to watch the movie The Pursuit of Happiness, the Will Smith movie. There could be not, and the book is even more dramatic in everything this man went through. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll confess something to you. I do not allow my children to utter the word fair. That's not fair. That's unfair. Because I've told them, when you use the word unfair, which is what you're arguing here, that somehow things are unfair, you rob yourself of an imagination of what you could become if you would just stop whining and figure out a way to carve out your niche. It is true, in a country of 312 million people, there will be people who slip through the cracks. Thank God we give $300 billion a year to charity. That's also part of capitalism. Adam Smith envisioned such a rich system that people would give. But the moment you start believing that opportunities do not exist, you condemn yourselves to failure, and this is one of the biggest problems with our government, encouraging poor people to be dependent on government rather than to look for opportunities that do exist in this capitalist, largely capitalist system that we have.
Thank you. We're going to now move to the student question period, and I was told that there would be some index cards coming on that. So Morales, do you have those?
Yes, we do have index cards. We also have microphones if students would like to ask a
I
question.
mean, however you guys wanted to do that.
Sure. Chester, if there's anybody who would like to ask a question, we can pass around. If you guys have any questions for either for our moderators.
If you could say your name and lead with that.
Real quick, as you ask that question, I want the panelists to remember we're still going to follow a 2-minute format so we can get to as many as possible.
My name is Jake Huckabee. This is a question for Professor Lembeck. Could you elaborate on you said that the ranking scale that Professor Chambliss is, you disagree with that completely, it sounded like. Can you elaborate on why that's not correct?
It's not that I agree with Professor Chambliss specifically. The heritage rating is what it is. You can look it up and you can find out what it is. It's just that there was a change in government a couple of years ago that brought in a more...
I'll talk louder. But brought in a conservative government that did relax legislation and did make... reversed a lot of the legislation, a lot of important safety nets that Australians were used to. And that government has made itself so unpopular in the last 2 years that they've been in power, that if they were to face an election now, today, they would lose.
But they're ranked fifth,
According to the Heritage Foundation, this is the Heritage Foundation's own ranking. This is not the feeling of Australians living in Australia. This is what the Heritage Foundation is stating about the country. But in spite of what the Heritage Foundation may say about the ranking of Australia, if you're an Australian living in Australia, my family still lives there. I still talk to my parents on a regular basis. I'm familiar with what's going there. I was there a couple of years ago, just before this election. And that the government that is in power right now has reversed a lot of legislation that Australians were very proud of. It was one of the most environmentally friendly countries. It was one of the most environmentally sensitive countries in terms of its legislation and regulation of industry to make sure that they toed the line in terms of not polluting the environment, conserving resources, putting in renewable energy, those sorts of things. A lot of that has been reversed. That has made the federal government extremely unpopular. They lost an election. The same party that is in power in Canberra right now as the federal government has just lost an election in Queensland where they had, there were 60 seats in the legislation. They had all but 8 of them. It is now split equally. That's the level of mistrust and dishonor.
Professor Chambers, rebuttal?
And this makes perfect sense because everyone in this room will have to decide between the trade-off between liberty and security. So a little while back, the Australian people voted for more economic liberty, less government in their life, less taxes, less regulation, more control over their own lives. And so they voted for more economic freedom. And by the way, it's not just the Heritage Foundation. They rely on dozens of economists around the world with many, many different components that go into these rankings. And so Australia moved up on the economic liberty list. And every time you gain more freedom, ladies and gentlemen, you lose some security. So that's the question you have to ask for yourself. And it's perfectly true. If the Australian people now see what liberty looks like, and they prefer being safe, and they prefer being secure, and they prefer getting somebody else's money to make them safe and secure, that's the choice they're going to have to make in these elections, and they'll move further down on the rankings. So what this means is the Australian people have looked at what liberty can look like, and they've realized that liberty means personal responsibility. You have to guide your own life, make your own money, make your own choices, and you're not allowed to plunder the taxpayers to do it. So they've now tested the waters with greater liberty. They've decided that it requires too much personal responsibility, and they don't have as big a safety net. And so now they want to move back to more security. And when they do, they will slide on the rankings, just like the United States has slid on the rankings as we've continued to expand the welfare state and more controls over the people. But that means people in Australia can look at the list and say, wow, New Zealand's close by, Hong Kong's close by, and they can vote with their feet, as people have been doing for centuries, and pursue freedom somewhere else.
Thank you. Another question?
This is a question for Professor Lindbergh. I've heard it said that which is obtained too cheaply is esteemed too lightly. And by extension of that, I think the greatest criticism of socialist style of government might be that it can't perform services as efficiently, or it might perform them more wastefully than the private sector would. Could you speak to by your judgment, can the government perform services as efficiently as the private sector?
Let's give this a try again and see.
What happens? You can argue both ways. It depends on the people who are running the services as to whether it's run efficiently or run inefficiently. Governments are inherently criticised as being inefficient. Private companies are typically considered to be somehow more efficient, but private industry wastes a lot of money too. They can be just as inefficient as governments. There are some services which private companies should not be involved in, that should be the purview of governments. Do you want to hand over everything to private industry and have nothing in the hands of the government? Do you want to have a private military? There are some things that are the purview of governments, and they do it very well. And as much as we may criticise government for being wasteful and being inefficient, there are some services that are much better provided by governments. Again, I look at the country that I come from, I look at Europe, and I see a greater involvement in government in providing services like public transport. Public transport is great in countries where governments provide public transport. Where's the public transport in America? Because it was privatised, it disappeared. We now drive cars. Now we're criticising the fact that there are too many cars on the road, we need public transport. Now we have to pay for it, the governments get involved and they're putting in the public transport system. Don't ask the people in Los Angeles how much they pay for public transport. And they had a very efficient public transport system prior to about 1945. It was privatised and disappeared so that the car could dominate.
Professor Chambers?
Well, it disappeared because Americans prefer cars to spending 4 hours on a bus, getting somewhere where you can get there in 20 minutes. Again, that's part of freedom. But I want you guys to consider this. If you won the lottery someday and you had children, would you send them to private school or public school?
Private.
If you needed a kidney and it had to be shipped from Seattle overnight, would you tell the person to go to the post office or use FedEx? If you could spend 5 o'clock on I-4 or the East-West Expressway, what would you pick? If you could convert Target and Walmart and Starbucks, if you could make them operate the same way the tag agency or the Department of Motor Vehicles operates, would you want to go to a Target where they gave you a number and said, we'll serve you in 2 hours? Look, it's very simple. The private sector has the proper motivation, making a profit. And they've got the proper consequences called losses and bankruptcy. They care about themselves and they realize if they don't provide the best coffee, they don't provide the best medicine, they don't provide the best hammers, whatever the case might be, you will stand in front of them and say, I'm going somewhere else with my hard-earned money. And that holds their feet to the fire. Look at government. You mentioned the military. Well, that was the only thing that was mentioned. So let's look at other things that have been privatized. Water has been privatized in many cities. Ambulance service has been privatized. Everywhere we see this taking place, we see taxpayers' obligations going down. We see the efficiency improving. Again, because of the efficiency of the profit motive. When government is in charge, look at what they do. They say, you will pay your property taxes, and we will pick the school your kid goes to. And even if we're failing, this is still the school they have to go to. Our government tells you, this is the Department of Children and Family. Even if we lose children and don't monitor things, you will still have to pay your taxes. The federal government tells us, even when your military invades countries that did not invade us first, waste billions of dollars in foreign wars that have questionable constitutional merits, we will still take your money by force, and what are you going to do about it? And we're not paying attention enough to vote out the politicians that pick these things. So if you look at the track record of everything you're wearing, think about everything you're wearing, everything you drive, all of your entertainment options come from people in the private sector seeking profit, not from the government.
Questions?
Yeah, actually, Professor Chambliss, Professor Lembeck, this is not actually a question as much as it's a comment on both of your statements. I'm listening to you, and actually, Professor Chambliss, I took a course with you a long time ago. You got a lot more hair, so did I. Anyway, since then I traveled around the world, not in the military and not on little junkets, and not for the government, but working for a company. And I'd say both of you don't have it quite 100% right. Both of you have some things right. Here's what I'm talking about. You're both kind of forgetting one thing. I hesitate to use this word because a lot of people, they hear a word and they don't understand what it's saying. But when you use a term, I'm going to say evil. You're forgetting evil. And by that, I don't mean, oh, he's a drug dealer or he's a killer or whatever. I'm talking about people who are sociopaths, psychopaths, self-deceivers. Give an example. A self-deceiver is Thomas Edison. When, of course, Nikola Tesla came to him with the AC circuit, instead of saying, hey, I'm wrong, let me rewire my motors, which would have ultimately gotten him a lot more money in the long run, he decided to go out and start murdering animals. I've seen this happen in a personal history about a gentleman who sat there and told us all about how women who aborted babies should be sent to prison for the rest of their life. And he had all kinds of good reasons, all sorts of religious reasons. It turns out that he was self-deceiving. He suddenly screamed at me, because I decided to have some fun with him and play the devil's advocate. He suddenly screamed at me, if all the women that had aborted babies had them, how many of them would be able to buy my product? I'm paraphrasing because it hit me like, it hit me kind of like an accident, had hit you. Don't really remember what happened. Needless to say, we never talked again. Also, I've been to Hong Kong. It's not free.
So, can you modulate it into like your question though, so that they can...
I'm trying to, but the problem is I see where both of you come from. And the problem is I've been to Hong Kong. I've been to Australia. I've been to China. In China, they have a saying, if you can cheat, cheat. And they have capitalism, but it's controlled by the government.
Okay,
So
when I try to get to other students.
Anyway, I'll let you guys alone, but
Thank you.
I'd just like to say you're both right, you're both wrong.
Go ahead, or I should say reply.
Well, first of all, since I didn't invent any of the things I talked about today, I'm standing on the shoulders of dead guys who I find to be geniuses. You may need to research whether Adam Smith was wrong, or Frederick Hayek was wrong, or Friedman was wrong. But I will say this to your point about, especially the mass killings. If you look at the history of the world, and you compare the number of people that have been killed by capitalists, by business people, corporations, business people, and you compare that to the number of people who have been killed by government, well, the record is clear. 62 million were killed by Joseph Stalin, the Soviet Union. 30 million were killed by Mao. Okay, almost 10 million by Hitler. So we've got 100 million people just in those three places killed by government. But if we add up how many people died because of Exxon, or it's the standard by which we measure evil still weighs more heavily in supporting free human beings, largely unshackled by government, rather than trusting more and more government in our lives. So your travels around the world, I'm sure, have led you to see that the more closely people are aligned with government, and government itself is responsible for a lot more terror than private individuals disconnecting and simply trying to serve their fellow man.
Professor Lindbergh, your time.
Evil is
Where do you find it? There's evil in all aspects of life, and it is an unfortunate part of the human condition that there are people who will live outside the norms that most societies consider to be acceptable. For all the evil things that are done, there's also a lot of good that can be done. And there's a lot of good that is done in the name of government, in the name of private corporation, in the name of private individuals. I would point this out to you, and you can take this any way you want to. It's strictly up to you. We rail against the existence of nuclear weapons. We find them to be particularly evil. And we hope that no one ever uses them. But bear in mind that there is only one country on earth that has ever used nuclear weapons in anger. This one. No other country has used nuclear weapons in anger on innocent people. Is that evil? We claim that it's not because it ended the Second World War, it saved millions of people. But go and ask anyone who, if you could, ask anyone who died underneath those two atomic explosions. Was that evil?
And that's time. We have time because we're going to stick to our hour-long format, and so in doing so, we can do one more question. Anybody? We've got a microphone coming to you here.
Looking at both of your different views, socialism and capitalism, if you pitted two different countries against each other, what would be the long-term effect? Like, how would one society look after 100 years of mostly pure capitalism? How would a society look at 100 years after mostly pure communism?
Is that to anyone first? Okay. That's our limit.
It depends on whether you can get pure capitalism and pure communism.
I suppose, like, not full on, but it's within 95% how, like, communism and then 5% how capitalism. It's close to it, but you can't get as close as you can.
I'm not sure that I'm in a position to state what that would look like, because each will have, I mean, it's going to be a bit like everything in life. Everybody is going to be judging it on the basis of what they're comfortable with. I'm not willing to speculate 100 years into the future on a pure capitalist or a pure communist society, because I would not like to live under either of them, to be quite honest. There are good points and bad points about both systems. No system is inherently evil. It's the way that they are executed that creates the evil that we find in the systems, or the bad points that we find in the systems. And I don't believe that you could ever have a purely capitalist system that would last 100 years, nor could you have a purely communist system that would last 100 years without being perverted in one form or another. So under those circumstances, to speculate what they might look like after 100 years is a moot point.
But I do think we have some evidence to see what the experiments have looked like. The Soviet Union started out with this vision of Marxist utopian society and was gone in 75 years. We got rid of the horrific institution of slavery and began in full force our Industrial Revolution by around the year 1880. And by the 1980s, 100 years later, we were the richest civilization that had ever existed in the history of the world, and with a military whose threats towards the Soviet Union helped speed up the rate at which the Soviet Union died and moved towards capitalism. The final test is this: where do people, when given the choice, try to move to? Do they try to get to places that have more freedom and allow for more risk-taking and entrepreneurship? Or do they try to get to the places that have more security and control and regulations? World history is unequivocally clear. The rafts and the boats and the planes keep heading to places like the United States, and the Soviet Union had to build a wall to keep its people in. They did not build the wall because communism was so superior that they were afraid of being flooded with immigrants. They built the wall to keep their own people locked into a system that was destined to fail the moment it started. So if you have to pick over the course of your next 50 years what would be better for you, just look at world history, and the most miserable places are the places that practice the least amount of free markets, liberty, and capitalism. It's just that simple.
Actually, it's time. I'm going to turn the mic over to Raw, who is going to tell you a little bit about the club that sponsored today's event.
Thank you, Professor Crosby. Thank you, Professor Chandler and Woodbeck. And I would like to thank all of you for coming over to our debate and having a fun time. We do have refreshments in the back. Pizzas and drinks are there. Please feel free to have them. We have Abigail in the back who is taking a sign-in sheet. So if you guys could just be kind enough to sign in with her, we would really appreciate that. And we are the Young Americans for Liberty. We will be continuing to support the ideas of liberty and bring you both sides, as you saw. We meet every Wednesday, every other Wednesday. We have 2 or 3 more events happening this semester, where we will try to bring more of such elements. We'll bring you guys both sides. And we also have our Facebook pages, so if you guys would like, please contact us, and we would love to have you guys over. Thank you for your time. Have a good day.